magic of public speaking takes you to the top, no more dreaming. Makes you a world-class speaker. This a complete system, ain't nothing easier.
Welcome, everybody, to the Communication Lecture Series. I'm your host, Adam Banks, and this is a podcast where I take a communication topic and I lecture on it. Today, we are going to be talking about interpersonal communication. I would like to call this episode a first look at interpersonal communication. The first thing we have to do is define interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is the process by which people exchange information, feelings, and meaning through verbal and nonverbal messages. It is face-to-face communication. It often only involves 2 or 3 people. Much of communication is not really personal. We do acknowledge people, but we interact with them on a very surface level, not a personal level. With a select few, we communicate intimately. And what I'm talking about is 3 different types of communication, 3 different distinct types of communication. That is the I-it communication, the I-you communication, and the I-thou communication. So what is the I-it, the I-you, and the I-thou communication? That is the relationship level that you have with somebody. In an I-it relationship, we treat others very impersonally, almost as objects. In an I-it communication, we never really acknowledge the humanity of other people. We may not even affirm their existence. Sometimes we do not treat salespeople, servers in restaurants, clerical staff, people working in customer service. We treat them as instruments to do what we want them to do, take our order, deliver what we want. So that is an I-it relationship. An I-you relationship is the second level of communication, which accounts for the majority of the interaction that we have with people. People acknowledge one another as more than objects, but they don't really fully engage into deep conversation. So they kind of go a little bit beyond the I-it communication, but they don't really go all the way to an I-thou. They just keep it in the middle. When you small talk with people, that is I-you communication. Work and the weather, or you might say a little something beyond the answer that you have to give. If somebody says, hey, how may I help? If somebody says, can I help you? You only have to say yes or no. But if you want to go beyond that yes or no, you're kind of engaging in an I-you communication level at that point. If you go beyond the answer that you were required to give. If somebody says, can I help you with anything today? And you say, no, thank you. I'm just looking around trying to spend a little of my money. It's the first of the month. And that might strike up a conversation with the salesman. They know a little bit about your personality. Not much, but they know that you might have a sense of humor. You might, they obviously know you like to go and shop. And they found that out just by very little small talk. That's I-you communication. And then finally, there's I-thou communication. And that is the rarest kind of relationship that people can get to, is an I-thou communication relationship. When we interact with people on an I-thou level, we meet others in their wholeness and individuality. When we talk with people on a I-thou level, we really do become human. We become fully human because we let our guard down. We let people in. We share secrets. We share intimate things about our lives, problems that are going on in our lives, our hopes, our dreams. We share those with people that we have an I-thou communication level with. And like I said, that's very rare to have that type of relationship with somebody. So it might just be a spouse. It might just be a parent or a sibling or a best friend. There are different features of interpersonal communication. The first feature that I want to talk about is selective. As we noted earlier, we don't communicate intimately with the majority of people we encounter. Most of it is IU communication. That's the small talk type of communication. And that is selective. We're very selective with how we talk with people. For instance, if we get a phone call from a pollster, we may only respond to the questions and not engage with the caller with any type of information other than just basic information. The next type of feature of communication, of interpersonal communication, is systematic. And systematic is talking about how your communication changes based on the environment that you're in, the situation that you're in. For instance, you're going to talk differently in church versus how you would talk at the club on Saturday night. At least I would hope so. Or I'm sure most people talk different around their friends than they do their parents. That is what systematic communication is in interpersonal communication. We talk to our doctor different than we talk to a pastor. We're not going to share medical information with our pastor. I mean, we may on a certain level, but not to the level we would with a doctor. So we open up more about our medical information with a doctor, and then we open up maybe more personal information with a pastor. And then again, the situation always changes the communication we're in. Church, the club, grandparents' house, bubby, sissy, mommy, daddy, communication changes. Okay, the next feature is process. Communication, interpersonal communication rather, is an ongoing, continuous process. People become closer over time with communication, but communication, it is a process. You have to work your way up from an I-it to an I-you to an I-thou. Friendships and romantic relationships, they gain depth and significance over just the course of time. And just how you can become close with somebody, you can also decline in your relationship with somebody if you don't spend enough time with them. Relationships on the job also evolve over time. Think about people that you first started working with on day one, and now look at your relationship with them now, maybe 6 months later. Some people we work with become our best friends. The next feature is personal knowledge. Interpersonal communication fosters personal knowledge and insights. With family members whom you have known all your life, you understand some of their worries, their concerns, and their personal issues in ways that new acquaintances can't. Longtime friends have a history of shared experiences and knowledge that allows them to interact more deeply than casual friends can. So, personal knowledge of someone can definitely affect the way you communicate with somebody. If you know somebody is a sports fan, you can talk about sports with them and bond with them on a level than with somebody that didn't know anything about that person. If you know this person, you more than likely know their interest, their personality type, and that can really help communication between you two. And finally, the last feature is probably the most important feature, and that's meaning creating. The heart of interpersonal communication is shared meanings between people. We don't really just exchange words when we communicate. Instead, we create meanings as we figure out what each other's words and behaviors stand for, what they represent, what they imply. Meaning grows out of histories of interaction between unique persons. If you can't make out what somebody is trying to say, then communication hasn't occurred. Let's talk about the interpersonal imperative. Have you ever thought about why you communicate? There was a psychologist named William Schultz, and he developed interpersonal needs theory, which asserts that we create and sustain relationships to meet three basic needs. The first need is for affection, the desire to give and receive love and liking. The second need is for inclusion, the desire to be social and to be included in groups. And the third need is for control, which is a desire to influence the people and events in our lives. It makes me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You look at the bottom, which is the most basic needs according to Maslow in his hierarchy of needs pyramid. In the bottom, he's got needs, physical needs for survival. That's air, food, and sex. You got to think, ever since we were babies, we have been communicating to express our physical needs. We cry when we're hungry. We cry when we're sleepy as children. As adults, we communicate with our doctors. We have to communicate with them to tell them what's wrong with us, what kind of medicine we need, or what kind of symptoms we have, so they can help us. Heislow, he next talks about safety and protection needs, which is things like shelter. Think about the ways we communicate with people, talking about shelter and safety needs. For instance, if your roof is leaking, or you have a problem with termites in your apartment, you have to communicate those needs for your safety to the appropriate person. Communication also helps protect us from dangers and harm. When foods are determined to be unsafe, we hear about that through the media, which is a different channel of communication. We also have belonging needs, and belonging needs is the third level in Maslow's hierarchy. The need to belong, or our social needs. People who are deprived of human interaction over a long time may fail to develop a concept of themselves as human beings. Maslow also talks about self-esteem needs. We gain our first sense of self from others who communicate how they see us. Parents and other family members tell children they are pretty or plain, smart or slow, good or bad, helpful or difficult. As family members communicate their perceptions, children begin to form images of themselves. So our self-esteem starts right when we're just little bitty children. Maslow also talks about the self-actualization needs. That has to be the most abstract human need, is the self-actualization. Communication fosters our personal growth. Therapists can be powerful resources in helping us identify our potentials. Our friends, our family, our coworkers, and even our teachers can help us recognize the promise that we have in ourselves that we otherwise might not see. Let me give you an example. Let's say this guy named Benjamin. Benjamin says, Mr. Bentley really helped me when I had my first job. It wasn't much, just serving at a sandwich shop, but he mentored me. He noticed I was awkward interacting with people, and he said I could learn social skills. He showed me how to be more effective, how to make customers feel more comfortable, how to notice subtle cues that they needed something. Before that job, I thought of myself as kind of an introvert, somebody not very good with people. But Mr. Bentley saw a possibility in me that I hadn't seen in myself, and as a result, I developed social skills and confidence that I had never had before. Now let's talk about the principles of interpersonal communication. There are 8 basic principles for effectiveness in interpersonal communication. The first principle is the fact that we cannot not communicate. It is impossible not to communicate. We are constantly moving. We're not constantly saying verbal words, but we are constantly moving, which is nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is actually 93% of our overall communication. 93%. That only leaves 7% of our communication being verbal. It's because we're constantly sending messages with our nonverbal communication. Even when I teach in a classroom and I look out in my class, I can tell if my students are understanding what I'm saying by just looking at them. They don't have to say anything to me, but they can communicate with me nonverbally. That look on their face, the look of confusion, tells me that they're confused. When they're very involved in the conversation and they're asking questions and they're shaking their head and nodding in agreement with me, that lets me know a message nonverbally, that they are understanding what I'm trying to say. Even if we don't intend for our nonverbal to send a message, It always does. So it is impossible not to communicate. Principle 2 is interpersonal communication is irreversible, meaning you can't take it back. Once you say it, it's already been said. Now, there's ways to go back and try to fix what has been damaged, but you cannot take back what was said. You can't erase it. You cannot unsay something you've already said. Principle 3, interpersonal communication involves ethical choices. It is your choice as a human being how you want to treat other people with your communication. There's some people out there that don't care to be mean to other people, using their words, giving them even a bad look, which would be nonverbal communication. People don't care if they hurt other people's feelings. And the reason I say people don't care is because it's a choice that's totally up to the individual. So it is totally up to you as a person of how you want to communicate with other people. Principle 4, people construct meanings in interpersonal communication. Words mean different things. We live in a world where good means bad. Like the word sick. The word sick can have different meanings, right? The most common meaning is if somebody is sick, that means they're ill, they don't feel good. But a lot of generations will take a word like sick and turn it into completely something different. Like that shirt you got on is sick, which means that's a really cool shirt. That's a nice shirt. Principle 5, meta communication affects meanings. So what is meta? Meta means about. We're talking about communication. We are talking about what we are doing. So the word meta communication comes from the prefix meta, meaning about, and the root of word communication. Thus, meta communication is communication about communication. For an example, during a conversation with your friend Pat, you notice that Pat's body seems tense and her voice is sharp. You might say, "You seem really stressed in our conversation." Your statement is meta communication because it communicates about Pat's nonverbal communication. We use words to talk about other words or nonverbal behaviors. Principle 6, interpersonal communication develops and sustains relationships. Think about it, folks. Interpersonal communication is how we maintain the relationships that we have. You cannot build a relationship with somebody without communicating with them. The more you talk on the phone with somebody, the more you converse with somebody through text messaging or emails or writing letters, the closer you will remain to that person. The way we get close to people, the way we develop a friendship or a relationship is through communication. And that's the same way we sustain it. So we use communication to gain something and sustain it when it comes to relationships. Principle 7, interpersonal communication is not panacea. Although good communication may increase understanding and help us solve problems, it will not fix everything. Interpersonal communication is not a fix-all. It helps in a lot of situations to talk things out and to communicate and to make things better and to explain things. But communication, as we've learned seconds ago, it's not irreversible. You can't, or it is irreversible. You cannot take it back. Principle 8, the final principle. Interpersonal communication effectiveness can be learned. Communication is not a talent. It is a skill. And you need to know how to separate talent and skill. Talent you have naturally. Skill is something that you can work on by practicing and perfecting your craft. And that's how communication is. You can become better at communicating by practicing and trying to get better at it, making a conscious effort to get better at it. Now let's talk about the guidelines for interpersonal communication competence. Scholars find interpersonal communication competence as the ability to communicate effectively, appropriately, and ethically. Effectiveness involves achieving the goals we have for specific interactions. In different situations, your goals might be to explain an idea, to comfort a friend, to stand up for your position, to negotiate a raise, or to persuade someone to change behaviors. Interpersonal communication will help you develop a range of skills. Think about all of the times that we have to communicate in life. So don't you want to be better at it? Don't you want to make things easier on yourself in life? Well, you can do that by just knowing how to communicate. It helps you with negotiating for a car, for instance. Knowing how to communicate, how to negotiate. It helps you with buying your first vehicle or second vehicle. It also helps you express yourself. Sometimes people have so much feeling inside of them and they don't know how to express it. They don't know how to communicate it. They don't know how to explain how they're feeling. And interpersonal communication also helps you become a better listener, which is just as important as communicating. And we're going to talk about listening if we haven't already in our lectures. Another skill related to competence in interpersonal communication is the fact that it helps adapt communication appropriately. The ability to communicate in a range of ways don't make us competent unless we also know which kinds of communication to use in specific interactions. You don't want to talk about yourself all of the time. You want to hear the other person out, see what they have to say about a certain situation. We probably know people in our lives that love to only talk about themselves. Well, those are the annoying people because they don't really know how to adapt to other people's communication. Your goals for communication are a primary guideline for selecting appropriate behaviors. If your purpose in a conversation is to give emotional support to someone, then it isn't effective to talk at length about your own experiences. Another skill that is closely tied to competence in interpersonal communication is engaging in dual perspective. Seeing where other people is coming from. That's what that means. Respect others' beliefs and morals. Not everybody thinks the way you do, which means not everybody does the same thing you do. They don't practice the same religion, or they might not vote the same way you do on election day. But does that make them wrong? Absolutely not. That means that they're different than you. Their thought process is different from you. So you should engage in dual perspective. Try to see where that person is coming from. There are 3 guidelines that can help you increase your ability to take the perspective of others. First, be aware of the tendency to see things only from your own perspective and resist that inclination. Second, listen closely to how others express their thoughts and feelings so you gain clues on what things mean to them and how they feel. And third, ask others to explain how they feel, what something means to them, or how they view a situation. Asking questions and probing for details communicates on the relationship level that you are interested and that you want to understand. Monitor your communication is the 4th ability that affects interpersonal communication competence. Monitoring. Monitor your communication, which means to monitor and regulate your own communication. Sometimes I have students in my speech classes record themselves giving a speech. That way they can see what they look like giving a speech. You don't know what you look like when you're communicating or you're talking. You're not aware of what your nonverbal is doing all of the time because you can't see it. You can't see it. So the easiest way to see what you look like talking and what you might look like to other people when having a conversation is to monitor your own communication. And the best way to do that is to make a conscious effort to pay attention or just straight up record yourself one day communicating with somebody or giving a speech. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Have you ever heard that? Sometimes people don't mean to be mean, but their tone or the way they say it, it comes across very rude and very mean. So if you ever want to become a better communicator and avoid things like that from happening, you should monitor your own communication. And finally, and last of all, the final requirement for interpersonal communication competence is committing to ethical communication. This commitment requires that you invest energy in communicating ethically with others as unique human beings, both face-to-face and on social media. So, in sum, interpersonal communication competence is the ability to communicate in ways that are effective and appropriate.